Hello and welcome to the 18th lesson of this Excel course. I'm Sumit Bansal, and in this video we will learn about data validation in Excel. Let's get started by understanding what data validation means and how to use it in Excel. Data validation in Excel would let you specify a criteria that can decide what you can enter in a cell or what value or content the cell can hold. Let me show you how to use it. If you go to data tab, here you have data tools group, and within this you have this option data validation. If you click on it, you would get three options: data validation, circle invalid data, and clear validation circles. Let me show you what happens when you click on data validation tab. When you click on this button, it gives you this data validation dialog box, and here you have three tabs: settings, input message, and error alert. I would talk about settings tab first, and here you have this option data validation criteria, which allows you to choose a criteria which you can specify, and that cell or any cell on which this criteria is applied would hold a value based on the selected criteria. So for example, if I say allow any value, and if you apply this data validation on this cell A1, then any value can be entered, which is the default position of all these cells. But you can also specify these conditions. So for example, if I say whole number, I would get these extra options. It would ask me, do you want your data between a minimum and maximum value? Let's say I specify something like I want my value to be between 1 and 60. So the minimum is 1 and the maximum is 60. And now I say OK. Now you do see there is no change here, but if you go to the cell A1 and you press 1, you can see it can be entered. If you press 2, it can be entered. If you press 60, it can be entered. But if you press something which is greater than 60, if you press something like 61 and hit enter, it gives you an error. It says the value you entered is not valid. A user has restricted values that can be entered into this cell. And this is the entire concept of data validation. This cell has restricted entry because I have specified that this could only hold values between 1 and 60. Now you can change this data validation option. You can again go back to data validation, and here you can change these options. Let me show you what all options you have. If you select whole number, then you would have all these data options of between, not between, equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, greater than equal to, and less than equal to. You can choose any of these options and specify the criteria and the range, and it would only take those numbers that are allowed. If you go and select decimal, again you have the same kind of options here where you can specify, but these would also allow decimal numbers. Here it was only whole numbers. If you choose the third option, list, this is really interesting. You can create a data validation list which would be like a drop down in a cell. Let me show you, because this is something which is very important and I use it very often. Say for example, I have these alphabets here. Oops. Since the data validation is applied here, I cannot enter anything else, so I would have to clear all. I would go here and I would say clear all. So this is removed. Now if I type A here, B here, C here, and D here, and I want a drop down here in this cell on which if I click I should get these options A, B, C, D. So to do that, I would go to this cell, go to data validation, and select list in this drop down, and here in source I would say these four cells A1 to A4. And now when I click OK, you can see that in this drop down I have these four options A, B, C, D, and this is a drop down. I can select it. If I try and enter something here, maybe say E, it would not be allowed because I have specified the source and only these four alphabets can be entered here. Similarly, these could be names, these could be numbers, these could be anything. You can create a drop down list for any number of these items, and these items could be anything. It could be an alphabet, number, anything that you want. Now let me show you other options in data validation. If you select date, then again you can specify the date, the start date or the end date. So for example, if you are say calculating overtime for your employees, you can, for the month, then you can specify the start date as the first day of the month and end date as the last day of the month, and you can have these options again, not between, equal to, not equal to. If you select time, again you have similar options here. In terms of text length, you can specify how long the word or the text or the content could be. So in this case, if I say that I want people to enter their email ID or say their phone number, and that could be a minimum of 10 digits and maximum of say 15 digits. Then if I try and enter something here, so if I try and enter 1 2 3 4 5 here and hit enter, it would not let me do it. So that it kind of puts a condition on the user that if you are inputting something here, then their length should be a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 15. If I try and put something which is 16 characters long, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16, and I hit enter again, it does not let me do it. So you would have to, and if I decrease it by 1 and hit enter, it lets me, because now this is only 15 characters in length. So you can also specify the length of characters. You can also use custom, and custom is a very important option because it lets you use formula here. So for example, if I use a very simple formula which is blank, and I use this cell C4, which means that the formula is blank, and if this formula returns true, only then this cell entry would be allowed. If this formula returns false, then the entry would not be allowed. Now in this case, if you look at this, is blank C4 would not let me enter anything, because as soon as I enter anything, this formula would return false. So let me show you how it works. I would try and enter something here. I would try enter my name, and as soon as I hit enter, it does not let me enter anything. Similarly, I can specify a lot of things here in custom, and I would show you a lot of examples in this video later where I would use formulas to create validation rules. But just to show you a little more of what can be done, let me use left formula, and let me say that, let me first construct the formula here so that you understand what I'm trying to do. And here, suppose I have my name Sumit. Oops, I cannot, because let me use this cell, Sumit. Now here I would construct a formula left, and the text is this, and I would say the number of characters here should be 1. This is my formula, and I would say if this is equal to S, then only the entry should be allowed. Now let me show you how it works. I copy this formula, I select this cell, let me delete it, I go to data validation, I go to custom, and here I put this formula left of C5 comma 1, which means that the leftmost character, if it is S, then the entry should be allowed, else it should not be allowed. And when I click OK, try and enter anything else. Let me try something like Susan here. It is allowed. I type my name Sumit, it is allowed. But as soon as I type something like Trump Excel, it is not allowed, because this becomes false now. So this is how you can use data validation in Excel and all these options. Now let's see in the next part of the video how to use input message. When you have applied a data validation rule on a cell or a set of cells, you may want the user to know what kind of rules are applied and what kind of data is allowed in that cell. So for example, you may want the user to know that only dates are allowed in a particular cell, or only numbers from 1 to 60 are allowed. So to do that, you can go to data validation. Again, in the data tab, in this data tools group, you go to data validation, and in data validation dialog box, you choose input message, and here you can use a title and input message, and there is this option, show input message when cell is selected. Now if you remove this option, then you would not get this title and input message, so you have to have this option checked. Now in this case, let me say I am using a cell, so let me first apply a rule somewhere. Let me say I would apply a rule here that only dates can be entered with the starting date as today's date, or the first day of this month, which is September 2014, and the end date would be say 30th September 2014, and I click OK. Now the validation rule has been applied here, and I want my user to know that he can only enter data which lies between these two dates. So to do that, I would go to data validation, and here in input message I would type date or only dates allowed. And maybe in input message I can say enter date between 01/09/2014 and 30/09/2014. Now when I hit OK, you can see that when the cell is selected, it would show me this message. If I go to some other cell, this would not show a message, but if I go to this cell, then the message is displayed. You may think that this is very much similar to a comment, but I'll show you the difference between a comment and this message. Let me also insert a comment. I would press Shift F2 to insert a comment, and I would type the same thing, the same message here, but in the interest of time, let me just type test here to show you how it works. Now a comment, if you go and select this cell, you can see that this message is displayed, but the comment is not displayed. The comment is displayed only when you hover the mouse over that cell. So this is only when you are using a mouse, but this message of data validation would be displayed whenever the cell is selected, which is usually the case. If you are entering data in a cell, then you would obviously have to select it. So this is a very good way in case you have a form, or in case you have a dashboard where only limited numbers or values are allowed, then you can use this input message to tell your user what kind of data they can enter. When you apply data validation on a cell, and when you enter something which is out of range or something that does not follow that rule, then Excel prompts you with an error message and asks you to either retry or enter the data again. So for example, here if I apply the data validation rule, let me go to data validation, and here if I apply the rule whole number between 1 and 100, and now if I type something here, if I type 101 and hit enter, you can see I have this error which says the value you entered is not valid, and that can be entered into the cell, and you can either retry, you can cancel, or you can go to help. If you retry, you again get a chance to enter the value. If you go cancel it, then this value is deleted. But you can also modify this alert that you see, because this was, to be honest, not very descriptive. If I show you again, you would only see that the value you entered is not valid, but it does not tell you anything else. So you can change this error message by going to data validation dialog box, and here going to the error alert. Here this is by default checked, which says show error alert after invalid data is entered. If this is not checked, then it will not show you any error. But to show you how to change these error styles, I would keep this checked. Now you can see there are 3 error styles: stop, warning, and information. Stop would not let you enter anything. So if I choose stop, I can also specify the title and the error message. So for example, here I would specify value not between 1 and 100, and here I would say please enter value between 1 and 100. And now when I hit OK, I go here and I type 101 and hit enter. You can see that it gives me the title value not between 1 and 100 and this message, which is a bit more descriptive. User would now know that the error here is because I have entered something which is out of range, and he can retry, go here and type something which is within the range. If I again go back to error alert, this is the sign that you saw, this red danger mark. But if I change this to warning with again the same message, it would not restrict me in entering this data. It would allow me to enter this data with a warning. So for example, here if I click OK and if I type 101 and hit enter, it says value not between 1 and 100, please enter value between 1 and 100, and it asks me continue. If I say yes, it would keep this value. It would not neglect it, reject it, or ask me to enter again. So for example, here if I say yes, the value is there. So in case you are working with data or forms where you want entry from your users, say for example if you're looking for a 30 character name entry and the name of some person is huge, big, with 4 or 5 words in it, then you may want to allow that user to put his name with a warning that only this much is allowed, but still you're allowed to put in the number. So this is one way where you can have the number or the value with an error alert, but you still allow that number. You do not reject it, or you do not ask the user to enter again. Similarly, there is third thing, which is information, and here it is just to inform the user. It will not even tell them that this is something which is not allowed. It would just inform them. So for example, if I click OK, and now if I enter something here 102 and I hit enter, you can see that it gives me the message that I typed, but it says OK, cancel and help. It would not say continue, or it would not say retry. It allows me to put it with just an information here. So for example, if you are entering the data here and you have to specify something, then you can do it here with an information for the user, but this is not restriction of any kind for the value that has been inputted. So this is how you can customize the error message in data validation. Now so far we have seen that we apply a data validation rule on a cell and then we try and enter data. But what if I already have this data, and this is these are numbers from 1 to 12, but what if you have huge data set where you would want to identify what are the cells that do not follow the data validation rules that you want to apply or you have applied. So to do that, you select the entire data, you go to data validation, in data tab you go to data validation, and here you apply the rule that you want to. So in this case, let me apply whole number, minimum 1 and maximum 10. Now since these are already entered, these would not be removed or you would not get an error message. But if you again try and override these cells, then you would have to make sure that your minimum is 1 and the maximum is 10. So here if I click OK, nothing happens, but these two numbers 11 and 12 are still out of range. This is greater than 10, which is the allowed limit in this case of data validation. So to identify all those cells which are not following the data validation rule or which do not fulfill it, you go here and you click on circle invalid data, and as soon as I click on this, you can see that it has circled the invalid data. If I try and overwrite it, for example, if I try and enter 13 here, it would anyway not allow me to enter this number. But if it is already entered and then I have applied a data validation rule, this is a quick way to identify cells that have a value which does not fulfill the rule that I've applied. Similarly, you can go here and you can clear the data validation circles. This is a good technique if, again, as I mentioned, if you have a huge data set and you want to maybe say identify blanks, then you can use custom and you can specify a condition is blank, and then you would have all these cells highlighted. Let me show you. I think talking about it does not make so much sense as showing it. So here I have these blank cells and I go to data validation, and here I apply custom and I say is blank, is blank. Now when I click OK, only these two cells will fulfill the condition. So I would say not is blank, and this is my condition, and I click OK. I think I'm missing, right, obviously I'm missing a cell reference here, so I would select A1 and I click OK. Now if I go to data validation and circle invalid data, it did not work. Let me go back to data validation rules, and I have to uncheck this which says ignore blanks, because here in this case it is ignoring blanks and I do not want that. I click OK, and now when I go and circle data validation, you can see it has circled these cells which are empty. So this is a quick way to identify all those cells which are empty, and you can simply go here and clear validation circles. I would show you a very simple example here. I have these three fields: name, age and date of birth, and you may have a huge form, but I would show this example by using these three fields only. And the intent is that a person should first enter his name, and only then should he be allowed to enter his age and date of birth. And if the person has not entered the name, then he should not be allowed. He should either get a error message or those entries should not be valid. So in this case, I will have to apply data validation rule to these two cells. So let me show you how to do this. I would go to data validation, and here I would use custom. And as I mentioned, I would show you a lot of examples how to use custom and formula. And here I would say, let me first create the formula here so that you would also see how it works. I would say is blank, and I need to check for this value, and I would hit F4 to lock this. Why am I hitting F4? Because if I hit F4, then the same rule is applied to both these cells. But if I do not hit F4, then if I use this cell reference for cell D3, when I go down, the cell references change. So it is important that you make sure how you want to apply a rule, and you need to be sure about the relative and absolute cell references. In this case, I'm using this cell reference by locking it, and I would say if this is blank, this would return true. If this is blank, I do not want that. I want that this should be filled. So I would say not is blank, which means that this cell should not be blank. Now I would copy this. Let me enter so that you would see here, just to show you what happens if I type my name here, Sumit Bansal. This becomes true and I can enter stuff here. But if this is not true, then I would not be able to enter anything here. So now let me go to data validation, and here within custom I would use this formula, and I click OK. Now if I go here and I want to type something, I want to type something like 30, I'm able to do it. If I want to type something like 01012014, I am able to do this. But if I delete this and I do not enter the name first and I try to enter something here, it is allowing me. Let me go and check what happened. Right, because I have this ignore blank cell unchecked. I have to uncheck this, and now when I click OK and I delete this and try again, this does not allow me to enter anything unless this cell is filled. Now since this is an age, I would also want to apply data validation rules to it. I've already applied custom number, which is based on this cell's value. So I would want that only numbers between 1 to 100 can be entered between this in this cell. So to do that, I would have to expand this formula, and I would have to use something like this. If this cell F4 is greater than 1, and if this cell F4 is less than 100, then true, else false. This is one of my condition, and I would put both these condition within AND. Now if you look at this, there are two conditions to this. There are two logical formulas. First is it is checking for the value in D3. If it is greater than 1 and less than 100, and if it is in this criteria, it returns true, else it returns false. Let me close the bracket here, and here it is logic 2, which says that this cell should not be blank. Now if I hit enter and I go here and I type my name, Sumit Bansal, it still remains false because this value is not between 1 and 100. Now if I type 30 here, it becomes true. So I would use this formula, and I would go to data validation. I would select this cell, go to data validation. In custom, I would type this formula and hit OK. Now if you try and enter something here, so for example, let me delete everything. If you try and enter age here, it will not allow you to do that. If you type the name in the cell above and try to enter the age, it allows you, but if you try something like 120, it again gives you an error. So see what we have done. We have made it dependent on two cells. First, that this cell should be filled, and then this should be between 1 and 100. Similarly, you can apply a condition where you can say this cell should be filled and the date of birth should be between certain ranges. So this is how you can use custom number format, custom formula settings in data validation to get what you want and to make your cell's rule dependent on some other cell. In this case, it was dependent on D2. suppose you have these products here. So I have product 1, product 2, product 2.1, 2.2, 3 and 4, and I want to create a drop down. Then I would go to data validation, and here I would select list, and within list I would give this as the source data, and I would click OK. Now when I look at this, it gives me product 1, 2 and these, but what I want is I want to indent this product 2.1 and product 2.2 so that it is visible that these are part or sub part of this heading, which is product 2. In this case, data validation does not allow you any simple way of doing it, but the way I'm going to show you way around. So in this case, it would not necessarily do anything. This would remain the same, but you would see that this has indented. And the very simple way of doing it is to just introduce a couple of blanks here. I would introduce 3 blanks here, and I would introduce 3 blanks here. Now if you go to the drop down, you can see that this has been indented. A very simple trick, but it was really helpful when I was working with one of my colleagues. So now you can select any of these things. You can select product 2 or you can select product 2.1, but you would now know that this is a part of these. Here I have these 4 numbers, and I have a drop down here which has these 4 numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now I want to display these as quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, but I want to use the output of this cell in some of my formula. So for example, a simple formula could be I check this cell and I would display what quarter it is here. So I may be creating a dashboard where I need to make this quarter selection so that the values dynamically change, and in that way I would want to display Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 here with these still being values. And I've already showed this trick in one of the videos. I think it was the formula mix and match video, but I would repeat it again. Here I would simply press Ctrl 1 to open the format cells dialog box, and here in custom I would add Q here, and that is it. As you know, in custom number formatting, it only changes the way your cell looks. It does not mean that the underlying value would change. So now if I click OK, you can see it looks like Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, but the basic underlying value remains the same. It is 1, it is 2, it is 3, it is 4. You can still use these as numbers in formulas. Now if I go to the drop down, you can see it shows Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So this is a way you can disguise your number as text in a drop down list. Now if I select Q1, here it still shows 1, which I do not want. I want still this to show as Q1, and again to do this, press Ctrl 1, go to custom and make the same change. Make this Q and hit enter, and again this shows Q1 but is 1 at the back end. So now you can use this in any of the formula you want. It would use the value 1, 2, 3 or 4. So this is how you can disguise a number in a drop down list in Excel. Here I have these 4 years, 2010, 11, 12 and 13, and I want to create a drop down using these. So I go to data validation, and here I select list, and within list as source I select these 4 cells and I click OK. So now I have these 4 years displayed here, but if I have to add a year here, I added 2014 and I go to the drop down, it still shows me 2013. And I would have to manually go and change this range again and again if there is a change here. So this is a simple example where I only have one drop down, but in case you have multiple drop downs, then this would be a tedious job to go for all the cells and change these for all the cells. So an easier way here would be to use a formula. So let me first show you how to create a formula that would change this range, change with this range dynamically to account for anything which is added. I would use the offset formula here, and I would use reference, this cell as reference. I would hit F4 to lock this. In rows I would say 0. I don't want to offset it by any row or by any column, but I do want to change the height, and the height would be how many entries are there in this column. So to do that I would use count if formula, within which I would use this entire range. I'm just covering myself in case someone is using a lot of entries, so this formula would cover them. I would lock this, and in criteria I would say not equal to, within double quotes, ampersand blank. So this cell should not be blank, and in width I can leave it blank or I can type 1. In this case I would leave this blank. Now if I hit enter, this gives me 2011, but if I hit F2, get into the edit mode, select this and press F9, this gives me all these cells: 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14. If I delete this, go to this cell again and again select this entire thing and hit F9, this would now dynamically update and not show 2014 because it is not there. So now I would use this formula. Let me select this formula, and instead of a list, instead of a source list here, I would use a formula. And since this formula return values, it would work in this list column. So it is not only custom where you can use a formula, you can also use a formula in list. The only condition being that this should return numbers or text or anything, but it should be a list. Now when I click OK, it is accepted, and now when I go here, you see it has 10, 11, 12 and 13. If I go and change this value to 2014 and again go back to the drop down, you can see that this is dynamically updated. If I again add a lot more values to it, 2015, 2016, 2017, again this would be dynamically updated. So this is how you can create a dynamic drop down list in Excel. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you and have a nice day.